What's up everyone, it's King Moosh here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 27 of Class Overview. For those who are familiar, the Class Overview series is a collection of informative videos where we'll be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem 3 houses.
We'll be going over general information about each class like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't really be any major spoilers, but I advise you anyways to watch your own discretion, and if you haven't played 3 houses yet, you absolutely should.
This episode will be focused on the Fortress Knight class. It's a 4-move infantry class with all the standard terrain penalties. Fortress Knight has 2 class abilities, Axe Fair, which grants plus 5 might when using an axe, and Weight -5, which decreases total equipment weight by 5. In order to certify for Fortress Knight, you need to have at least a B rank in both axes and heavy armor. The axe requirement isn't difficult, especially since almost every physical unit will want to get at least C rank for Brigand, but the heavy armor requirement can be a little rough, especially if you're not spending a lot of time in Armor Knight to passively train it. Fortress Knight skill level bonuses are +3 to axes, +3 to heavy armor, and +2 to lances. At a base level, the axe bonus can be nice for quickly picking up axe prowess ranks 4 and 5, as well as whatever combat art your unit gets at A rank, and possibly axe crit +10 as well. The heavy armor bonus can allow you to potentially pick up an additional weight -5 if you feel it's worth equipping. They can also help you push for the B+ rank axes and A rank heavy armor requirements for Great Knight, which is a potential upgrade or side grade at level 30. While the lance boost is usually not too useful for Fortress Knight since it only gets axe fair, Great Knight gets both axe fair and lance fair, so a higher lance rank may be helpful if you choose to go down that promotion path. That being said, not every Fortress Knight will necessarily want to be promoted to Great Knight, so the value you get from these skill bonuses is variable, but it's still a nice set.
As for stats, Fortress Knight is a bit unique as it is mostly hyper-focused on the stats you want for prod tanking. Most of the bases are pretty standard for a physical class: 17 strength, 8 magic, 12 dex, 10 luck, and 7 res, which is slightly below the sword class that we just discussed. Also the very low base 8 speed, which is to be expected. Turn for slightly lower res and a bad speed base, the HP and defense sit at a very notable 35 and 17 respectively. The defense stat is the highest in the game, tied with Great Knight and Edelgard's unique Armor Lord and Emperor classes, while its HP is the highest amongst non-unique classes. This is definitely a point in its favor, as even if a unit doesn't want to actually stay in Fortress Knight, they can at least certify into it to patch up their stats. Unlike Armor Knight, however, which is only D heavy armor, B or even C+ is considerably harder to reach, so the opportunity cost of patching up stats by wasting time training heavy armor might not be worth it though. As for growth rates, it has a great +30% to HP, a nice +10% to strength, a +5% to charm, while the most notable is certainly the +15% to defense. If you want to grow your defense stat, this is definitely a class to do it in. I'm not even joking when I say literally every other class in the game that has a defense growth modifier is only at a measly +5%, aside from Armor Knight, which is at +10%. Unfortunately, these growths, while great, come at a cost of a -10% speed growth penalty, which is honestly par for the course given the fact that it's an armored class. Lastly, for the boost, and once again the defense shines here, is Fortress Knight has a colossal +10 to defense, while also supplementing that with a nice +5 to HP as well. Following the trends of growths, units have a -6 to their speed wall in this class. In general, all the stats are hyper-focused towards HP and of course defense, while nuking its speed given the fact that it's a prot tanking class. You'll be doubled on pretty much every turn while in this class, especially on maddening, but on the right units with already good defense, that might not matter at all.
The master ability of Fortress Knight is Pavise. It's an interesting ability that has a chance of activating every time your unit is hit by a brawling, sword, lance, or axe attack. There is a common misconception that the skill works against physical attacks in general. However, it does not work against bows despite most of them doing physical damage, but it does work against weapons like the Levin Sword and the Bolt Axe that deal magic damage. The percent chance of it activating is equal to your unit's dexterity stat, and if it does activate, it will reduce the damage of that attack by half. Given its defensive effect, it naturally synergizes well with Fortress Knight's inherent defensive capabilities. Unfortunately, it has similar problems to Miracle in the sense that it is unreliable as a defensive ability due to being based on a percent activation chance. It's definitely more reliable than Miracle because your unit doesn't have to be at risk of death just to have a chance of getting value from it. It can just passively reduce the damage you take regardless of how much HP you have left. It also helps its case that since Fortress Knights almost always get doubled because of their hefty speed penalty, this gives more chances for it to activate. Pavise can be transferred to other classes once you obtain it, which can be situationally useful. It does seem to be best designed for a prod tanking dedicated class like Fortress Knight or Great Knight, but can often be unnecessary extra damage mitigation on those classes since they're already so tanky. On the less tanky classes, it can be much more clutch when it does activate. Overall, Pavise is far from the best ability out there, but it can be okay on the right build. If you're running a low health build, it can be nice for keeping you alive at low HP, but it may also make it more annoying to drop your HP in the first place, so there's a lot of factors to consider when it comes to equipping this ability.
Fortress Knight has a few strengths given its role. As you may have guessed from earlier, the stats are definitely a selling point for the class. Those who want to certify in the class to patch up their stats might want to consider Fortress Knight given the high HP and defense bases, while those who want to stay in it have a very strong +10 to defense to help them fit into the prod tanking role. While prod tanking is somewhat niche in 3 houses, Fortress Knight is at least the best in that niche given the bases and growths, which makes stacking a large amount of defense very easy. Although some may prefer dodge tanking as it often doesn't sacrifice movement or speed, prot tanking provides a way for the slower bulk units to eat up attacks while garnering pretty good potential in the enemy phase. Comboing a unit with already decent defense with that plus 10 boost as well as a shield, and you'll have a unit that is nigh invulnerable to pretty much all forms of physical damage. This obviously works great with Wrath or even more often Battalion Wrath, and saves an ability slot as being so ungodly tanky disregards the need for Vantage in most situations. Combining that with an esteemed Killer Axe Plus, and you have a solid enemy phase unit assuming you can get it on the front lines.
Unfortunately, Fortress Knight comes with quite a lot of drawbacks in exchange for its strengths. At 4 move, it is tied with the 3 magic advanced classes, but below all the physical advanced classes in terms of movement. When you have classes like Paladin with 8 move and Canto, Wyvern Rider with 7 move Flight and Canto, or even classes like Assassin and Grappler that have 6 move with Forest Walking all at this point in the game, Fortress Knight just really struggles to keep up, and it leads to reduced turn efficiency. This is made even worse by the fact that as a primarily enemy phase focused class that is supposed to take the aggro for your squishier units, it's a struggle to keep them in the front line because of how bad their movement is. There are ways to get around this with utility like Warp and Stride, but it's debatable if it's really worth using so many resources on Fortress Knights when you can use dodge tanks or Vantage Wrath units. They can enemy phase just as well, if not better, than Fortress Knight, while also requiring less resources due to being able to use high mobility classes. This is really the main fundamental weakness of this archetype of classes that we've already discussed with Armor Knight previously. Aside from that, there are also some less significant weaknesses which are much easier to play around. Fortress Knights are very vulnerable to magic attacks if they ignore their high defense and go for the resistance stat instead, which will definitely be much lower. However, most maps don't have that many magic units compared to physical, and the magic units are usually much less mobile, so with smart positioning this isn't too much of an issue. Be careful that in maddening difficulty, they can also be surprisingly vulnerable to snipers and bone knights due to the percent base damage from Poison Strike, which won't ever kill you, but will hurt a lot more than most attacks you take. The speed penalty can also be a big weakness depending on how effective your prot tank setup is. If your defense is good enough that you're taking 0 to 2 damage from most attacks, then being doubled all the time isn't that big of a deal. But if you're taking more than that, it can become much more of an issue, reducing the number of enemies you can bait per turn and also making you need more healing.
As for the final rating, 3 out of 10 is what we've decided for Fortress Knight. Honestly, I kind of wish I didn't have to rank this low, but as for how we rank classes, it depends on a few things. Combat performance, how good the class can perform on maps without too many other variables helping them, as well as miscellaneous elements, such as high bases for certifications or strong mastery abilities in combat arts. Our last category, however, is generally what does a lot of these classes in, or excels them to the top, and that's how viable they are in comparison to their competitors. In terms of advanced stage axe classes, if you're going to be raising axes, generally you want to pick up Warrior for Wrath that can set up some really good enemy phase dodge tanks or Wrath Vantage builds on Wyvern Rider or even Master, as well as War Master later down the line. Most of these builds are just better combat-wise, and more importantly, they are also more independent since they don't really need to be healed or worry about magic units nearly as much, assuming they have a way to counterattack them with bows, retribution, or even the Chalice of Beginnings. With all that being said, they're definitely not useless and when built properly can still be quite powerful. As I said earlier, they are generally strongest on units with already high defense, as well as sometimes having Battalion Wrath, as that's generally the best boost of kill power for prot tanks. Our recommendations that fit those categories are Dedu, Raphael, as well as Gilbert, who starts in this class, can be left as a Fortress Knight if you so choose. Unfortunately, he is Azure Moon exclusive and is only recruitable post-time skip, so you can't take advantage of the great growths early on like you can with Catherine on Swordmaster. As for others, Hilda and Alois are decent options with a bit less defense but have access to the coveted Battalion Wrath. These units also have either boons or budding talents in both the heavy armor and axe skills, so the certification shouldn't be too much of an issue for any of them either. Lastly, Balthus can work great even if he doesn't get Battalion Wrath. He still has a boon in both the skills, and King of Grappling is a great personal pair with normal Wrath and helps him defense stack even more.
I think the higher end of D tier is a good spot for Fortress Knight. The weird thing about Fortress Knight is that I think it's actually fairly strong in terms of combat performance when it's first unlocked. However, as you get further into the game and your unit stats and the enemy stats both get much higher, the plus 10 defense and plus 5 HP stat boost, which seemed so insane before, are still good, but not really as crazy as the value most other classes are providing. I also think this class suffers from how player phase focused 3 houses often is, since Fortress Knight's player phase potential is lackluster compared to the other advanced classes. I personally like using prod tanks. I almost always have a Fortress Knight or a Great Knight in my final comp, mostly just because I think they're fun to use and add some variety to the typical enemy phase setups. But when looking at the class in a purely objective lens, using Fortress Knights over the more mobile or just more versatile enemy phase options is usually suboptimal, especially if you're playing for low turn count. However, like pretty much all the classes in this game, I still think they can be very strong and worth the investment if you choose the right units for it and know how to build them correctly. So if you feel like trying out this class, I'd say go for it, but I recommend using them in moderation. That's basically all I have to say about the Fortress Knight class. If you liked the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment.
I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels.
Stay tuned for episode 28 on JCross' channel, where we'll be moving on to the next advanced class, Paladin.